Paleo hackers, welcome back. My guest this week is Dr. Peter Osborne, clinical director of Origins Healthcare. He is a board-certified chiropractic medicine founder of Gluten-Free Society and author of Glutenology, a series of digital videos and ebooks designed to help educate the world about gluten. He lives in Sugar Land, Texas, and he's with us today. So welcome to the show, Dr. Osborne.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's gonna be a fun one. I don't think we've had a gluten show in a year or something. I think Tom O'Brien was the last person we had on here.
Yeah, so hopefully we'll be able to add something to that.
Absolutely. Gluten's been getting a lot of talk about. Gluten-free is obviously more mainstream now and everything. But I'm curious how you got into being so passionate and really dedicating your whole life's work to studying gluten.
Well, it started for me in the VA hospital. I was in the rheumatology department there, and the patients coming in, they were veterans, very sick people, tons of autoimmune pain, rheumatoid arthritis, fibromyalgia, lupus, scleroderma, dermatomyositis, psoriatic arthritis, just the worst of the worst. The problem there was that nobody ever got better. The drugs were being dispensed. They had minimal pain relief, but at the end of the day, they felt horrible because the drugs suppressed their immune systems and made them get sick all the time. It caused severe gastroesophageal erosion. So the drugs, just the side effects themselves, it was one of those things where, is it worth it, right? And my boss there, he was a doctor. He'd been doing rheumatology for 40 years. The guy was probably one of the most bitter men I'd ever met in my life. He threw stuff at patients, yelled and cussed at patients. And I don't think he was bad, or I should say, I don't think he was malintentioned. I just think he'd been doing a job where, here he is doing the same thing repetitively for 40 years and nobody ever gets better. That's got to make a person miserable. And, you see yourself in the future thinking, is this where I'm going to be 40 years from now? Doing the same kinds of things and making people kind of go through the same gambit without any result. And that's what really got me thinking, what else could help these people? At the time, I had already known that, these were autoimmune diseases. And autoimmune disease, there was only one type of autoimmune disease that we actually knew the cause for, and that was celiac disease. And, of course, we knew gluten causes celiac disease, so why weren't we looking at all these other forms of autoimmune conditions and looking at gluten, investigating gluten as the potential reason why these people are sick too? And it kind of blew my mind thinking about that, why that hadn't really been done. And so, I took from that step, I turned over a lot of research on fasting, how people with autoimmune pain, if they would just quit eating for 48 hours, a lot of their pain would go away. And so I, two and two together, the only known cause is gluten. The only known way to get these people out of pain quickly is to have them not eat. Obviously, from that stance, it's got to be something they're putting in. And so I took that information and I collected, hundreds of research studies, took it to my attending physician, said, why don't we pull aside some people? Why don't we do some studies, here in-house, just some small-scale stuff, and let's see what happens. He basically told me, no, quit asking. Nutrition's not important, and we're not going to do this. So I left and opened up a practice.
That was the doctor who was throwing pens?
That was the doctor throwing stuff, yeah.
Did he throw a pen at you when you asked to do the study?
No, I mean, seriously, I don't say that to demean him or anything. He was a really nice guy beyond the fact that he was just embittered by 40, and to me, and this is my opinion, maybe he had other things going on in his life, so I don't like to prejudge, but he just wasn't a happy guy.
Sure.
But he wasn't a mean guy per se. But anyway, I left the VA hospital and opened practice, and one of my first patients was a terminal little girl. She had 6 months to live. She had a permanent stent embedded in her arm, and the Make-A-Wish Foundation had granted her wish. That's how terminal she was. And we did some studies on her and found her to be gluten sensitive, but her mom wouldn't take her on a gluten-free diet. Her mom said, no, her favorite food is pizza. She's dying. I don't want her to give up her favorite food. But fortunately, her mom also was sick. Her mom had rheumatoid arthritis, and so she actually went gluten-free. She felt so much better. Within a month, we had that little girl going gluten free as well, and that was close to 15 years ago now, and that little girl's getting ready to graduate from high school, off of all medications, stents out of her arm, no more, no life sentence of, no doom and gloom around her anymore. So that was one of the first experiences I had with the application of that very simple knowledge. What I say now is very simple knowledge that I learned in the VA hospital.
Wow, man, that's a powerful one when you see the effects of nutrition and, for better or for worse, either causing pain or relieving it. It can be really impactful. So then you put all this research into, the Gluten Foundation and everything else you're working on with patients. Is this what you're doing every day now still, like working with people?
I am, yeah. I spend 20 hours a week in the clinic, and then I spend time outside of the clinic working on Gluten Free Society, my foundation, and writing and educating.
So you put out the new book, or it's coming out, No Grain, No Pain.
That's
and,
right.
I got an advanced copy, and I was flipping through it. It was really, really fun stuff. You talk about fasting in there. I definitely want to get to kind of what gluten is and how to eliminate it, common pitfalls, and all that. Is that book out yet, or is it coming out?
It is, yeah. It came out last week, and it's actually already a bestseller. So I'd like to thank any of you who are listening. If you're already part of my audience, I appreciate your support.
What was the biggest lesson you learned putting together that book?
I think it was not so much the lesson I learned putting it together. It was the 15 years of lessons that I had learned that I put into the book. And so for me, it was more just, it was a work of passion, and being able to simplify complicated science for the average person to be able to read and understand with fluidity. That was probably the biggest challenge for me.
Okay. Yeah, sometimes they can get really complex with the medical terminology, and it can be over people's head. So then I guess to simplify it then, let's start talking about gluten and kind of what it is and why it affects us so much. Can you give us a simplified version or a bird's eye view of gluten 101? Yeah,
so there's two viewpoints or two camps on gluten. One is everyone else's and the other is mine. And what I mean by that is that gluten traditionally is considered to be this one single protein found in wheat, barley, and rye. And the name of that protein technically is alpha gliadin. And so, but the reality is gluten is not one single protein. Gluten, their actual definition is gluten is a family of proteins found within the seeds of grass, which seed of grass is all grain. So it's not just wheat, barley, rye, but it's also oats, corn, rice, sorghum, millet, teff, triticale, all the different varieties of grass seeds.
Oh, so even in like rice and things that would typically be considered gluten-free?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the reasons why my message resonates so well with the paleo community is that, the paleo community being largely grain, dairy, and sugar-free,
right?
They understand that, avoiding gluten is not enough. If you want to, if you're an athlete and you want to perform and you want to recover, you can't throw down tons of carbohydrate-based grains and expect to be able to do well.
So even like the gluten-free products that are with rice flours and I don't know what other flours they use. I guess almonds.
Mostly rice and corn. Almonds and nuts, so nut doesn't fall within the list, but corn and rice and sorghum are probably the three more common, grains that are used in gluten-free products that, technically they're not really gluten-free. I'm a big advocate of no grain, primarily because glutens are found in all grains, and glutens have been shown to cause detriment and inflammation and digestive problems and muscle recovery issues and insulin sensitivity problems. So now they're just fraught with trouble. So if you consistently keep them in your diet, you're just asking for a problem.
Okay. So what does gluten actually do in the body then when it gets in there?
One of the things that it does is it causes this condition known as leaky gut, which think of leaky gut. The medical term is intestinal hyperpermeability, but leaky gut is imagine your intestines like a garden hose, a solid garden hose from your mouth to your anus. It's a tube, and its job is to separate the trash in your food, the potential toxins that you're eating, right? Because all food contains to some variety and some degree toxins. I mean, plants have natural toxins in them. Meats have natural toxins in them. Our gut's job is to separate those things and excrete them while hanging on to the vitamins, the minerals, the healthy amino acids, and things of that nature. And so imagine if you're eating this food that creates microscopic rips and tears in your gut lining, in that tube. Now, all that waste has an opportunity to leak into your bloodstream. And then once it hits your bloodstream, it has access to everything. It has access to your liver and to your muscles and to your tissues, your cartilage, your ligaments, your bones, etc. And if the body looks at it, too long, what ends up happening is this process called molecular mimicry, where first your body's attacking these things leaking through, but after a long enough period of time, your immune system is so busy attacking the food, it gets so used to attacking your food, that it starts to look at you and say, hey, we need to attack you too. And that's what autoimmune disease is. It's when the molecules that are leaking through resemble your thyroid or your muscle tissue or your cartilage. And so then your body says, hey, we've been attacking these things leaking through, but you know what? The thyroid proteins kind of look like these things we've been attacking. Let's go attack the thyroid protein. And that's what we call autoimmune thyroid disease. So that's one of the components to what gluten does, or what the family of proteins, those gluten proteins, do when you eat grain, is they rip holes in your gut that then contribute to this molecular mimicry over time, contributing to and leading to an autoimmune disease.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So, okay. So with the autoimmune diseases come their own problems. So instead of treating kind of the autoimmune diseases, we get to the root cause, as people in functional medicine say, and the root cause in this case would be gluten. Yeah,
the root cause in this case could be gluten. Now, I'd like to iterate that there are other things in grain that are horrible for us, right? And gluten, everybody talks about gluten as if it's the demon child, but the reality is gluten is only one detrimental aspect of grain. You know, we have other things. There's actually 5 different classes of proteins found in grain, some of them recently discovered. Particularly, one of them is called an ATI, an amylase trypsin inhibitor. And this class of protein actually turns your pancreas off. It shuts your pancreas down and says, hey, don't produce digestive enzymes. And so when you're eating this grain and your pancreas shuts off, the grain isn't digesting and it rots in your gut. And it starts to feed the wrong bacteria. It can feed yeast. Overfeeding yeast leads to alcohol fermentation in the gut. And now that alcohol can leak into your bloodstream and make you sluggish and tired and have brain fog, can make you hurt, can damage your liver. You know, so there's different proteins in grains that are non-gluten proteins. There's another one that interacts with a receptor in your intestine called a toll-like receptor, and that causes a lot of inflammation, and again, it contributes to this leaky gut process. Many of the grains, the way they're processed and grown, contain vast quantities of pesticides like Roundup and atrazine. Unfortunately, if you're a guy and you're trying to build muscle and you're getting vast grain in your diet, soy does the same thing. These pesticide chemicals mimic estrogen. So here you are, you're trying to, ideally you'd like more testosterone to build that muscle to recover from your workout. But here you are eating such a hugely estrogenic food and chemical, and it kind of offsets what you're trying to accomplish with that workout.
Right.
And so the pesticides themselves also have to be processed by your liver. So now your liver's having to work harder, and that can lead to and tend to make your entire system have to work harder to detoxify on a regular day-to-day basis. Then you've got heavy metals, especially with rice. Rice is loaded with the heavy metals cadmium and arsenic, and these heavy metals interfere with your thyroid function, and they interfere with the way calcium works and helps regulate the different hormones that your body produces. So, you've got those are just a couple of classic examples of how eating grain is just not a smart move, and they're not. It's not just gluten. It's other things too.
In your book, No Grain, No Pain, the first chapter is grain, the grain-pain connection. So how does that work? Is it what we were talking about with the autoimmune conditions?
It in part. So one of the components is that molecular mimicry from an autoimmune disease that can set into your muscle tissue. So one of the diseases is fibromyalgia, right? The people with just chronic muscle pain. But there's something that happens, and I see it a lot in CrossFit athletes. I work out at the CrossFit boxes, and a lot of them will be gluten-free most of the time, right? Or they'll be paleo 90%, but then they'll have 10% cheat days and that kind of thing. But they'll get injured. They'll have chronic injuries. So like they'll have chronic tendonitis. You get on the pull-up bar and you do 100 kipping pull-ups. That and anyone who's in great shape might be able to do that, but then they have to recover from that. And if the food that they're eating, it tends to create that leaky gut and tends to allow that inflammation to seep into the muscle tissue, then it's a lot harder to recover. And these athletes will start to develop tendonitis. They'll start to develop a number of muscle issues and recovery issues.
Okay, and so it's the whole kind of 80-20 thing might not be such a good idea when you're trying to eliminate pain, and that little 20 or 10% could be the source of poor recovery or pain. Also, you mentioned grainflammation, right? I like the pun there because we love puns on this show. Dad jokes are very welcome. So talk about gluten, grains, and the inflammatory response they can cause.
So there's several properties. Some of them we've talked about. Pesticides going to trigger inflammation or grainflammation. The heavy metal is going to trigger grainflammation. The gluten itself can trigger a leaky gut, which then can trigger an inflammation. But then you also have the fact that grains, by concentration, are very, very high in omega-6 fatty acids. Now, omega-6 fatty acids, their very nature is inflammatory. And so think of the body as, in terms of fat, there's two kinds of primary essential fats. There's omega-3 and there's omega-6. And they help regulate inflammation. Now, I want to point out that inflammation is a normal process. It's not a disease process. The problem with inflammation is when the body is in chronic, consistent, persistent inflammation, and the inflammation never goes away. But the inflammation is normal to an extent in that, when you break down old muscle tissue, you want to repair that old muscle tissue with new muscle tissue. Inflammation happens to allow that to occur. But if the inflammation never goes away, then you don't ever come in and have that repair mechanism. And so when you're eating large quantities of grains, what you're getting is heavy quantities of omega-6, which set the stage for heightened inflammation because these molecules are inflammatory promoters. That's what they do. So one of the biggest reasons grain causes so much persistent inflammation has to do with the fatty acid composition.
Okay. And so the abnormal amount of omega-6 can throw off your 3-6-9 ratio, and that causes the inflammation, kind of like the corn-finished beef or non-grass-fed beef commercial.
Exactly. It throws off the balance and makes your body just jump to inflammation much more quickly than it otherwise would.
Kind of sounds like it's overheating. When you're overinflamed, it's like too hot. There's no cool off period, and like your car, for instance. I know that analogy gets used. If you just drive it all day long and it can't cool off, it overheats. Maybe you're going through Arizona and you need coolant in there, and so a lot of times we don't have the cooling off period, or we're just overheated with inflammation.
I like this analogy. I'll give you another one because you guys like these things, right? So imagine you're building a house, right? And to build that house, though, you have to rip down an old apartment building that's full of drug dealers and ne'er-do-wells, right? And so you take a big wrecking ball and you smash through the old building so that you can clear a space to build the nice new building, right? And so think of this as your muscle repairing, right? We're smashing down the old muscle to rebuild new muscle. But every time you start rebuilding that nice new building, the guy who's controlling the wrecking ball is drunk, and he just rolls that wrecking ball right through the house. You get the first story built and boom, he's just wrecking it. Every time you get something built in it, the wrecking ball just smashes through it again, and it's just the guy's out of control. That's what too much inflammation does when your tissues are trying to heal.
Don't want that wrecking ball.
Nope.
Tom O'Brien was on the show, of course, very good gluten expert, and he said something that blew me away. He said that for every one person that gets a gluten sensitivity in their gut, there's 8 that have it manifest in the brain. So meaning that when people are testing for gluten sensitivities, they're testing the gut and they come out squeaky clean. Oh, okay, I can go eat gluten. I don't have a problem. But what they may not be realizing is that could the problems could be manifesting in their brain.
Yeah, so that's the thing about gluten, is that it's an equal opportunity destroyer. It can affect the gut in terms of celiac disease or Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis or irritable bowel syndrome. But the vast majority of the impact of gluten occurs in nervous tissue. It's a known neurotoxin. So it's going to impact the brain. It's going to cause antibody formation in the brain that can make somebody dizzy and lose their balance. There's a condition called cerebellar ataxia where we get dizzy. It can create brain fog. It's actually been linked to Alzheimer's disease and multiple sclerosis. Those are, autoimmune diseases of nervous system tissue. So Tom's absolutely right. Gluten does definitely impact the nervous system as well. And the reason why the testing is so inaccurate is because doctors don't really test for gluten sensitivity when they measure you. What they're measuring for is gut damage only. They're not measuring for gluten sensitivity. They're measuring for gut damage. The only way to accurately test for gluten sensitivity truly is to measure, there's a genetic expression for this. So if you have there's 2 genes that we analyze, and if you have these gene patterns, your body looks at gluten as an enemy. That's just the way your body looks at it. And if you have those patterns, that's the way it is. And if you have those patterns and eat gluten, then your normal response to that gluten exposure is going to be to trigger an inflammatory tripwire. Basically, it's going to be to cause an inflammatory response. Again, that inflammatory response, it can occur anywhere in the body. It can occur in the muscles, the joints, the ligaments, the tendons, the bones, the brain, the liver, the spinal cord. I mean, you name it.
Yeah. I think that's a big one, too, that's important to touch on with brain fog. Because for me, when I heard about going gluten-free and weight loss, I was like, I'm pretty happy with my weight. Gluten-free, going pain, I was like, I don't really have any chronic pains. But I had brain fog, I would just boom at 2-3 p.m. A couple years ago, I couldn't even concentrate on anything. It was just not happening. I needed to sit down or drink 3 cups of coffee to power through it. Is gluten kind of the common source, you would say, for a lot of brain fog out there?
It certainly can be. One of the side effects, though, of gluten sensitivity is malnourishment, malnutrition. And one of the most common deficiencies that gluten consumption causes is vitamin B12 deficiency. Now, vitamin B12 is necessary to form the myelin sheath. That myelin sheath is the insulation that surrounds the nerves in your brain and spinal cord. So what happens to a lot of people is they develop brain fog, not because of the direct action of gluten, but because of the indirect action that gluten causes malnourishment, malnutrition. So gluten sensitivity can cause vitamin B12 deficiency and iron deficiency and magnesium deficiency. These nutrients are necessary for your brain to properly make neurochemicals that help you think straight. And that's why brain fog is a very common symptom.
So with brain fog, then, like if you were prescribing Clark some supplements or a protocol to clear up brain fog, what would you go to?
What I would go to is I would go straight to your bloodstream, and I would extract some of your cells, and I would analyze those cells. We'd radio label your DNA, and we'd measure your intracellular level of vitamins and minerals. And then we would say, okay, Clark is deficient in, in these 5 things or these 3 things or whatever your blood showed us. And then I would lay out a protocol exactly what you needed based on what your body was deficient in, as opposed to guessing. Now, we could guess, right?
Yeah.
But you get into the guessing game, and maybe you guess right and maybe you guess wrong. I always look at it like when somebody's health is on the line, they appreciate me not guessing for them.
Yeah. And is there something that comes up time and time again with brain fog that people need, that are deficient in? Like you mentioned B12. If someone's having brain fog, is that kind of like a universal supplement to add in, or magnesium, or some of the other things you were talking about? I know that's kind of going on the guessing side. But.
Sure, yeah. So my best guess then, B12 is definitely the most common deficiency I see in people with gluten issues. B12 and iron and zinc are probably the 3 most common. So if we're guessing, although I wouldn't put a guy on iron. It's a little different with a woman who's got a menstrual cycle. She loses blood every month and loses iron in that blood. But guys, generally, if they're not iron deficient and you start putting them on iron, it can actually create the brain fog. So I wouldn't indiscriminately just use a high dose of iron in any man But B12 and zinc are real safe.
Okay. Any other cognition boosters? I know this is a little off the gluten path, but any other things that can really increase your focus or that you've realized in your own health that have helped you?
Yeah, there's a number of different things. B12 and zinc, magnesium, but a specific type of magnesium, the kind that can cross your blood-brain barrier, called magnesium threonate, is the one that works probably best.
Okay.
Because magnesium has a hard time getting through the blood-brain barrier. So if you attach it to a threonate, which is a vitamin C derivative, it gets right through and it can start helping your neurotransmitters produce themselves, in a consistent manner.
Okay, those are good. So, Peter, earlier when you were talking about how you got into gluten and everything, you mentioned with your patients that one girl who is now about to graduate but was about to, it was in the Make-A-Wish Foundation and everything. You put them on a fasting protocol, and that really seemed to help. Can you talk a little bit about intermittent fasting and just kind of a bird's eye view of that and if that might help someone who's struggling with pain?
Absolutely. Yeah. So fasting, one of the things that we do when we work out is we program in our rest, right? We program that rest in because otherwise, we get overtraining syndrome and the muscles ache. We don't program rest though for our guts, right? And we're asking our guts to process food all the time. And generally we'll get an 8-hour fast if we sleep for 8 hours, but a lot of folks, they get 5-6 hours of sleep and that's it, right? So, we want to program that fasting in because we want to give the gut a chance to rest. Just like every other tissue, when you work it out too hard, its functionality starts to diminish. So what fasting does is it takes away the stress on the gut. Because if you've got a leaky gut, let's just say you have it, right? Every time you throw food in, that's a potential danger to your internal bloodstream. That's a potential inflammatory. Even though food is supposed to be healthy, right? Even though if we're eating healthy food, if we've got that leaky gut, we're creating an inflammatory response every time we eat. So if we can go a prolonged 16-hour period of time, letting our gut rest, I like to do intermittent fasting in a 16-8 kind of fashion where you choose an 8-hour window and you go with it. You eat your meals in that 8-hour window and you give your gut a 16-hour break point. And that way you allow it for full and faster recovery. Now, in patients with autoimmune pain disorders, we'll even fast them longer. We'll sometimes fast them 48 hours or longer just to get an initial dramatic improvement. And also so we can get them in their own heads to correlate their pain to their eating. Because a lot of times they just don't get it. They're in pain all the time. They just don't get why it hurts. And they never correlated what they were eating to their pain. And if we shut down the food and the pain goes away, and then we introduce food again and the pain comes back right away, now they've made that correlation and now their minds are open to manipulating diet a lot more aggressively.
Yeah, there's a lot of myths from the kind of early 2000s, 90s fitness nutrition movement, and that one that was floating around that you need to eat 8 small meals a day and kind of restock things and keep your metabolism up. People are scared that if they take 16 hours, their metabolism's going to just shut off and shut down.
Yeah.
Is that true, or what's your thoughts on that?
Not at all. It's never been true.
Yeah.
If we look at this from a paleo perspective, an evolutionary perspective, human DNA has thrived in a past environment of feast and famine. When there was food, and you ate like a pig until you were stuffed because you didn't know when your next meal was coming. And our DNA and our metabolism was used to that kind of methodology. So it got really, really good at storing because it didn't know when the next meal was going to come. And so, the body would go, hours and hours of fasting. And, it didn't slow down our metabolisms then. It's not going to slow down our metabolisms now. There's actually the opposite argument that can be made. When your metabolism is used to getting fuel every day all the time, understand that genetically your body wants to store. It's designed to store. So the more you give it consistently over time, the more apt it is at storing what you're giving it. So you could even be eating a normal amount of calories, but your body is such an efficient storing machine that it's just shoving it away into fat cells and trying to save it for a rainy day regardless of what you think is happening.
Yeah, we were just talking about cognition earlier and talk about a good mental boost. I find fasting to be really clearing for my mental function. I can focus a lot better. Is that something that you have noticed as well?
Well, it's a physiological truth, and here's why. When you don't eat, your blood is free to go to your brain. When you eat, understand that your gut needs tons of resources to digest your food. That's oxygen, right? And so we deliver oxygen through the bloodstream. And so your body rediverts blood into the intestine and away from the brain during digestion. That's why after a big meal, we want to take a nap, right? We don't want to think about doing algebra or calculus. We want to lay down. We don't want to think about anything. We want to take a nap and let that energy go toward the digestion of our food. And so when we're fasting, that resource doesn't have to be distributed to the gut. It goes straight to our brain. We have better cognitive thinking. We have better skills at thinking, and it just makes us more mentally aware.
With fasting, then, I know it's just a 16-8. Some people recommend the 24 hours once a week or twice a week. We had Brad Pilon on here, but let's just touch on the 16-8 eating window. During that 16 hours, do you recommend people abstain from coffee, tea, caffeine, or where does that fall into the protocol?
Well, it depends on the person. Everybody's a unique individual. A lot of my patients, I have them avoid caffeine for sure because their guts are inflamed and irritated, and caffeine can be a gastric irritant. So I don't want to have that in there if it's slowing down their healing process. But as a general rule of thumb, fasting is really liquid. So primarily clear liquid. So whatever we can get that's clear, preferably water, but broth is okay. Some patients can't tolerate fasting for that long a period of time. So we might bring in something with a little bit of caloric value so that they don't crash, because their pancreas is dysfunctioned and their liver's dysfunctioned and their blood sugar swings are so great that they can't handle the fast. So everybody's a little bit different. There's not a magic formula per se for everyone across the board. It's a game of trial and error per the individual based on other underlying circumstances.
Okay. Yeah, that's funny you mentioned that, because I remember when I was doing 16-8 with coffee, I would just crash as soon as I ate my first meal. But recently I switched to like a black tea, which still has caffeine in it, and I feel a lot better. Do you have any thoughts on why coffee was probably making me crash or anything?
It was probably just too much caffeine overstimulating your adrenal glands, pumping out too much adrenaline. And then that was telling your liver to basically push sugar out into the bloodstream. And because you were fasting, there wasn't enough there to feed you. So your liver dumps a ton of sugar into you. And then that's going to lead to a hyperglycemic rebound crash.
Okay. Yeah. Well, it feels a lot better, so I'm glad it switched. Going back to gluten, one of the most common things I overhear people talking about is, wheat's not bad, bread's not bad. My grandpa ate it growing up, or Jesus is the bread of life. We have historical texts of people eating bread nonstop. But what I've picked up is that they've kind of changed since old school grains. Can you talk a little bit about how our modern grains are different compared to how they may have been for grandpa or great grandma?
Yeah, I think in a big way they're different because there's genetic manipulation and genetic hybridization. So we create different strains of grain, and one of the ways we change grain is we make it survive better. We make it survive and protect itself better. Well, that includes our digestive tract. So if the grain is been genetically manipulated to survive the environment better, part of that environment is our gut. So we just have a harder time breaking it down, a harder time digesting it. But one of the other big changes has to do with the pesticide use. The farming practices today, let's throw glyphosate down on the ground before we plant it. Let's throw glyphosate down on the ground before we harvest it. So the grain's been double dosed in pesticide before it ever even hits the table. Then you also have the impact of actually processing it. When we process the grain, there's a lot of different things that can go into that, but we add chemicals, we add bleaching agents, and some of those things obviously are not going to be the healthiest things in the world to eat as a staple food in the diet. But then you also have this. So I even argue with the people that say my grandparents ate grain and they were just fine. I would argue with that. I would say if you really understand history, you know that when grain was really truly introduced as a staple food, it was only in 1900. Yeah, it's been around prior to that point in time, but not as a main staple food for the entire populace. Not 8 to 10 servings of whole grain a day as a recommendation put forth by the government. As a matter of fact, Dr. Kellogg, him and his brother introduced cornflakes in the 1900s to cause gut irritation in people who were constipated. That's where cereal came from. It wasn't this healthy fiber. Oh, eat this healthy fiber and you're going to be healthy. It was, how do we irritate the gut to alleviate this constipation? And so they got corn to irritate people and made it into a flake. And that's where cereal came from. Now, in 1943, cereal products were so popular, what was happening is mass disease. So the disease on a mass scale, and these were diseases like beriberi and pellagra that were occurring. These are vitamin deficiency diseases caused by grain. And so the government steps in and says, hey, you can no longer manufacture grain products unless you're going to add these vitamins into them because they're making so many people sick. Now, this happened in 1943, and most of your audience probably wasn't alive in 1943, don't know that history. If we take that and we kind of fast forward just a little bit more, here we have this entire fortification law. In order to process a grain, you've got to add synthetic vitamins to it, or it's illegal to sell because it kills people. But the cereal industry turned the marketing opportunity around, and instead of saying, don't eat us, we kill you, they said, now we're fortified with vitamins and minerals, so we're even better for you, eat more of us, and got the government involved. So one of the things that happened was the government got involved, and they took your tax dollars and subsidized the growth of grain to save small farmers who were at risk for going out of business. So those grain subsidies were given with the intent that we wanted to keep the small farmers in business so they could keep people fed. But what's happened since then is all these big conglomerate corporations have bought up all the farms. So now your taxpayer dollars goes toward genetically manipulated grains to feed people who are socioeconomically challenged. So here we subsidize feeding people unhealthy food that was killing people in the prior 1943, and we've subsidized the health care as well. So here we're subsidizing the food that's making them sick, and when they get sick, we subsidize the health care that's not effective, right? Because the health care that's subsidized is all the drugs. And we know, you and I both know, that drugs don't cure disease. They mask symptoms. So we subsidize the food that kills people, and then we subsidize the health care that doesn't really treat their health. It just masks their symptoms. It's a racket, in my opinion. It's a big, huge racket. I don't think anybody set out to be malintentioned, but I think it's just evolved into this huge corporate conglomerate mess. And other than educating yourself, and changing your own diet and creating grassroots movements like the paleo movement, I think those are the kinds of movements that are going to save, our future's nutrition.
Yeah, it's about focusing on what you can do as an individual. And one of the things, obviously, with this call that they can do is experiment with eliminating gluten and grains. So what's kind of your protocol, either in the book or that you recommend to patients for doing that?
In the book, it's a 30-day protocol. And we start the first 30 days with simply no grain. We're not eliminating other types of problematic foods like nightshades and legumes. We're just primarily eliminating grain. I don't want somebody to feel overwhelmed if they've never done this before. So we give a 15-day kind of grace period where they're eliminating grain, and then the following 30 days we're taking away more foods. We're taking away potential autoimmune inducing foods like the nightshades and some of the other legumes and things of that nature. And we're following them over a 30-day period. And what typically happens is, if they're in a lot of pain, if they have an autoimmune disease, we get 50 to 90% improvement. And it's so dramatic that the person who's experiencing the change has no desire whatsoever to go back to the old way of living. And so now that's really where they can start to make an improvement and an impact on their health. That's the book. In the clinic, we actually do individualized testing. We go much deeper. I mean, the 30-day protocol is designed as the catch-all for people who don't come in as a patient and just want to feel better without a doctor. But in the clinic, we test people for food allergies. We test them genetically to see what they should and shouldn't eat. We test them, make sure that they don't have heavy metal burden or heavy metal toxicity. We test the functionality of their guts and their GI tracts. We make sure that they are capable of producing digestive enzymes and that they have the right kinds of microbiome bacteria. So there's a lot more that goes on behind the scenes in the clinic. And we use these specialized tests to basically cater to a much greater sensitivity to the actual individual. And that's really what functional medicine is all about.
Okay. With the 30-day protocol then, grain, gluten, it's in everything. You know, you look at ketchup and it's got something in there. So they have to be really vigilant, I'm assuming, on making sure there's nothing in there whatsoever. Because like we were talking about before with your friends at the CrossFit gym, you know, even if they have that little 10%, it can spark all that cascade of inflammatory and pain responses, correct?
That's right. If you look at just the gluten part of it, 20 parts per million, which is about the size of a breadcrumb, can cause inflammation for up to 2 months. So if you have your cheat meal every week, you know, you're just staying chronically inflamed. You're not going to have that big of an impact.
Yeah.
It's not that it's all or none. It's that it should be all or none. And a person should, you know, if they're really struggling, they should take that 30-day time frame and really just roll it out and see how well it impacts them. Okay.
Any other tips or tricks they can do during those 30 days that kind of help commit themselves to gluten-free lifestyle? Because it's a totally different shift to how someone might normally be eating.
I think follow the protocol in the book. It's pretty straightforward and simple. It gives you 30 days of food and 30 days of ideas. Beyond that, make sure you're sleeping adequately. Make sure you're getting ample sunshine. Stay with the exercise. You know, basic fundamental tenets of good health. I call it the 7 fundamentals: food, sleep, exercise, sunshine, clean air, clean water, and laughter, right? So if you apply those things on a really consistent basis, you're going to optimize and maximize your ability to be healthy.
Yeah. There's a lot of other things that go into it that don't revolve around nutrition, like laughter and sleep and water and all that stuff that people can get so caught up in focusing on one part of those 7 and they miss the other 6. So that's cool. It's very important. Well, cool. Awesome, Peter. Thanks for coming on. Where would you like people to go to pick up the book? Can they go somewhere to get a copy of it, or does Amazon work?
Amazon works. We've got some bonuses for people. If you want to buy the book and you want to pick up the bonuses, go to nograinnopainbook.com. And we're giving away a couple $100 in awesome coupons for grass-fed beef jerky sticks, among other things. Extra recipes. I've got a leaky gut solutions manual. It's a 60-page book that we're giving away with the book. So you can grab all those bonuses at nograinnopainbook.com, or you can just pick up a copy at Amazon or Barnes & Noble or any other major retailer. Okay. All right, Peter. Thanks for coming on. It was a blast. I know gluten's a big topic to talk about for 40 minutes or so, but a lot of useful stuff I got from it. So thanks. Hey, thanks for having me, Clark. It was a pleasure.
Cool stuff. Dr. Peter Osborne with No Grain, No Pain. I like the puns in his book are great, because dad humor is always welcome on this show. Like the one I heard the other day of how many tickles does it take to make an octopus laugh? Guess. Come on. 10 tickles. Oh, man. All right, I'll get out of here. PaleoHacks.com, obviously the place to be. Thanks for subscribing. Leave a review and a rating on iTunes. Really, really helps us out. And the last thing, if you want to get a hold of me, let me know what you thought about this show. I am at clarkdanger.com. Just shoot me an email. All right, that's it. I'll see you next week. Thanks so much.